Hello, everyone. Hi. So, if you're watching this is the extra that we're giving as we wrap up identity security for textilers cohort 6, right? So this would be your extra, and we'll be looking at MFA, conditional access policy, and linking it to its relevance to managing identity. Um, Again, if you're just stumbling on this video on YouTube, my name is Joy Medom, and I am a cybersecurity architect. I've been doing this for 12 years plus, and I like anything identity, data, and AI security. So feel free to search for our other video series and watch, because then you will understand how we landed and found ourselves here with MFA. Um, so we're going to be looking at, first of all, um, we focused on Microsoft because, like we explained, there's so many identity providers, but in Textiles, we're very heavy on preaching Microsoft technology. And so we focused on looking at Microsoft Entra. The zero trust methodology would say always think zero trust, always verify, use privilege access, assume breach, right? And so in order for you to be able to achieve this, protect the cloud assets, right? When it comes to identity, Microsoft Entra provides things like password complexity rules, password expiration rules, self-service password reset, an identity protection functionality, password protection. We have what we call smart locks. We have the Entra application proxy. We have the single sign-on, which we learned in our last class, and we have the Microsoft Entra Connect, the MFA, and conditional access policy. These are different features that are available on Entra to enable you protect an identity, which is a cloud asset. We just finished learning single sign-on, and we saw how 81%, according to statistics, of passwords get compromised. And does it not add up when the average person has 168 passwords? I almost disagreed with that, like I mentioned in the last class, until I checked my Google password manager, and I have saved. Now I know some things that I don't use, but I have saved up to 200 and something passwords in my lifetime. So if I had to remember all those passwords, I can't, right? And the good thing is, if you even look at, if you set up your Google password manager, you see that it can also tell you your passwords that have been compromised. I have one or two there that are flagging as, risky, and I need to go and check them, right? So what does that tell you? It's also important in the Entra space, right? We look at how to help our users, manage their identity effectively. So while we're doing single sign-on, we want to, on top of that, layering additional security elements, right, that can allow us. So one of the things would be self-service password. Imagine where somebody, maybe on their own, perceive that their password has been compromised, right? I'll give an instance. I got a new device and I was setting it up, and the password that comes with it, the manual that was given, I was setting it up, and then I left it by my side because I got a call. And the reflex, because I was in a public place, the reflex was to excuse myself to go and pick that call. And I left that paper there. And by the time I came back and sat down and continued, something just said to me, "You left the paper. What's the guarantee that everybody around me did not look at that paper?" I had no guarantee, right? And maybe because I'm a cybersecurity person, so I'm thinking. So if you read the attacker's mindset documents, to always tell you that you have to think like a hacker. So maybe that's the problem with me. Like I tell people, I am paranoid with things because of by virtue of my job. I interpret everything. So maybe, but at that point, I started thinking, what if somebody has looked at the password and then sits down and look at my screen and do a social engineering on me, because I was trying to work as I was in that session. And so I was doing everything I can do, which is I can sit down and from your screen, the way you're working, one or two flash, I can know the company you're working for and stuff like that, and do a bit of social engineering so they will have an idea of and then if I go back to the internet, I can know what your email structure is and then use that. So I just started thinking, and guess what? I just quickly logged in and said, reset the password. Of course, I was told to reset the password before I do what I was doing, but I had not done it. I got carried away. So at that point, reset password became a priority for me, and I was not going to be distracted. So imagine if users are not able to do self-service password reset because we think that the risk associated with somebody who is not them trying to reset their password. And that's why we will not just say reset password, we will put additional layer there. But the benefit of that outweighs the risk, and we can now put other risk controls around the risk that we identify with when we say people can reset their password. So the ability to reset your password right on your own is a security, control, right? First of all, it will reduce the loss of user productivity. Imagine if I feel my account has been compromised and I'm calling help desk and I'm staying on the call waiting for help desk. Again, I'll give another story. I like to tell stories, guys. I had my virtual assistant call me on this day. Interestingly, I just chatted and said, I've paid you your salary. And she was excited. I said, thank you, man. And then a few minutes ago, she just, I don't think it was up to 30 minutes. She started calling me. And she's not somebody who is president because she knows my style. I might be busy. So I pick her call and she was crying, my account, they've cleared my account. Like, they cleared your account. Wow. She says, when she saw I had paid, she went to shop, and then when she came back, she was in the kitchen. And then the next thing, she saw debit alert, and it was like a dream. Her account was just getting debit alert. So she quickly called, contact center. But guess what? Contact center doesn't know that she's a critical, it's not an emergency contact center. Contact center is for everybody. So that user who probably is at the ATM struggling with their PIN calls contact center. She who has an emergency is calling contact center. So she was on the queue. By the time they got to her account was zero. Now, it gave me so much idea and opportunities that exist in the financial industry in handling, financial threats like that. But I could imagine the frustration of a customer. She, just looking at her account, why? Because she was on a queue of contact center just to deactivate her ATM or whatever, right? So you can imagine the power of self-service. So anything that has self-service brings a lot of security value, and productivity to users. And that's the same to Entra, right? But you can't do self-service without enrolling first, which is a good thing. So you can't just take a default account that has been created and then just be able to reset the password. The user account will be enrolled, and then following on top of that, conditional controls that will be put in place. The good thing with self-service, you don't have to wait for admin, right? I'm sure some of you are always frustrated. Maybe you want to install something on your system and they say, ask for admin. Trust me, that one is important. But you can see how frustrating it is. So imagine if you had to reset your password waiting for admin. Help desk, I've already explained that, waiting on the queue of help desk just to reset your password, either because maybe you forgot it or you sense that your password has been compromised and you quickly want to, use it. So the good thing with self-service is that we can use it in Entra. And how do you turn this on? Simple, I'll call it check-out setting. So if you go to the Entra properties, you will see there SSPR, and then there will be a button to turn on. And the good thing is you can turn it on in a controlled manner. So you can turn it on for selected people, test, simulate, identify all the potential risk with it, come up with the risk controls before you now turn it on for the organization, right? So the self-service password reset, and the good thing with this is that even the free version, so you don't necessarily need to be an enterprise customer to start to enjoy self-service, right? So the Entra ID free. The only difference is that if you're on the Entra ID free, right, if you have accounts, which in my head I'm wondering, if you're on the free version, why if you have on-premise synchronized. But what it means is that only identities that were created on Entra can change their password to self-service, and that makes sense, right? And then depending on the other versions you get, you can now use hybrid users to reset their password. Now, the good thing about self-service is that once that has done, we can also see that in our user sign-in report. So there's a feature in Entra called the user sign-in report. Another good security feature. What this does for us is that we can see sign-in prompts. So in the previous class when we were testing our SSO configuration, if for any reason we thought it had to do with the signing, we could go to the user signing reports and do some filtering and be able to see signing challenges and resolve it. In fact, if you do provisioning, if you do auto provisioning with SSO, right, especially when you be doing your projects, right, if you do auto provision with SSO and you're having login issues, if you use this user signing report, it can tell you what the potential or possibility of that issue is and point you one or two places to look and help your troubleshooting. So we've moved from self-service to multi-factor authentication. Like I said, self-service has its risk, and one of the ways you can mitigate that risk is by adding multi-factor authentication, because it will provide a more secure, authentication, identity verification. It has its own stronger security layer. It adheres to compliance. Like I said, many things we do, if there was no compliance and regulation, people would not be doing it, right? And it allows you to use different types of authentication methods. By now, if you say you're in security and you don't know these three words, hmm, hmm, please, something you know, something you possess, something you are, is our memory verse and rhyme when it comes to MFA. Something you know, which can be your password. Something you possess means that it has to do with you. So we say that anytime you are setting up authentication, this is the method. It has to be something people know, which will be what they will put in. And then there will be a second factor authentication, which is something they possess, which can be your fingerprint, which can be your authenticator key, your UB key, your reader, your smart card reader, or your phone authenticator app, right? And that now validates you. So if you look at this, so even if something you know, you go and tell somebody, what about something you possess, right? Right. So unless they chop off your finger or someone takes your phone, but at that point you can see that that's another level of risk. But from a baseline, security, access and optimization, you should always follow this method of not just giving people login. Don't always give people login without something you possess and without something you possess, which will now produce who they are. Now, there's something that Microsoft does, which is so awesome. We don't just do MFA like that, right? When we have MFA, we always stop MFA with a conditional access, right? A conditional access will always require a user to have MFA to access certain resources. So the way it works is they're like, is it Sesame twins? How do they pronounce that? Sesame twins. They go hand in hand, right? If is either a conditional access policy triggers MFA, or the need for MFA aligns with a conditional access policy, right? So you must always have it. So a user probably is logging in from a user's company is situated in Africa, and the user, based on the data protection of that their business, says that they should not exchange data with anyone outside Africa. They can set up a conditional access policy tied to location base, right? And say, if somebody is accessing these platforms outside this location, block. Or you can say, because it's holiday period now, lots of people are traveling, summer, lots of parents from one location will travel to another location, right? You see lots of signals now pointing out. So organizations can say, if any login is coming from so location, right? Locations that have been classified as red, alert, high risk, block. But if it has come from this medium risk, right, prompt for MFA. Now, the reason why you can do that, you can say, okay, because we know that the MFA is something they have, right? Even if the thing is flagging medium, it means that if they use their MFA, then it proves that they are the ones that are with, trying to do that login. Probably they forgot their password or something. So we never do, or we always do MFA with conditional access policy. Now, there are three states of MFA. You have a disabled state, meaning that this user has not enrolled. Then we have the enabled, which is the user is enrolled, but they can still use password. So it means that you have said use MFA, but you're still giving them the option to use password, right? And they can be prompted for MFA they'll be prompted to register for MFA, but the password option is still there. However, enforced is no. MFA all the time. MFA must be used. MFA everywhere, right? So that's enforced. A quick rundown scenarios where you can use MFA. Well, cloud only setup, hybrid, um, on demand. An application needs MFA, you add it. MFA with radius authentication. So for those who use network policy server, NAC, we call it network access control servers in their environment, you can infuse MFA to say that, after you've authenticated, you need to put a MFA before you can gain network access. Those are different scenarios where you can use. Here's just talking about that you don't just roll out MFA. Remember, we must balance security with user experience. So this just giving you high level deployment scenarios and considerations. Make sure that you get employee buy-in, right? Again, you can roll out MFA in batches, in waves. You don't have to just turn it off for everybody. And then as you roll out in batches, come up with a communication plan. Remember, staffs would have to use their phone for token. So you want to make sure that people are comfortable with that. People also understand what that means. Sometimes people can be paranoid and say, "Oh, you're putting a authenticator app on my device. What does that mean? Hope the company doesn't have access to my device." So you want to clearly communicate, and then let people know of the roll-up plan and the process. So they'll be enabled, and then maybe after 3 weeks they'll now be enforced. You want people to understand this. You want people to also understand what the conditional access policy now means for them, right? And then the options of authentication methods they have. So the whole idea is you need to plan your MFA process, right? And the platforms that need to be impacted by this. What are the supported methods of authentication that we have? You can use your mobile app, call to phone, text, right? So you know how you get a text or you get a call or the mobile app authenticator. These are the three supported authentication methods that you can use for MFA. So, like we mentioned, you have different types of Azure authentication methods. You have the Authenticator app. You have the Windows Hello for Business. Windows Hello for Business is the ability to be able to use your camera and your iRead or your fingerprint, to log in or with a PIN. So that way you don't necessarily need to remember a password because, that identity is tied and locked to that device. Again, that's another good way to, forget about worrying about password because everything is tied to your device. So my fingerprint, I log in, it means I'm there. My eye, I'm there, so I can log in. And then I just swift over this. These are the different kinds of authentication method, right, that we can use when we are deploying MFA. Again, Microsoft gives us lots of monitoring. So we've looked at user, sign-in monitoring. Now we can also look at user and insights, right? We can monitor MFA prompts, monitor the type of MFA devices that are used, and monitor how many people have set up MFA and how many people are yet to set up MFA. So there's a monitoring part, right? You can also use conditional access to enforce MFA for devices. So we can say if Intune has been onboarded into a device and the device is not compliant, maybe the company policy says that your system should not have patches older than 3 months. Like, Microsoft releases patches every month, right? And those patches have a date. So if the policy says if your system has patches less than 3 months old, block or reprompt. Another case where we see this happen is in mobile devices. So lots of people don't really update their the software of their devices. Many people don't do that. They don't even remember. But we in the security industry, right, because we get these bulletins that talk about how our devices are vulnerable on a steady basis, right? You can use those bulletins to configure. So you can say, for example, there can be a release that iOS version XYZ is prone to man-in-the-middle attack and all of that. But your staffs have their emails on the devices. And yes, it's their personal device, so you're doing BYOD, but because you can do man in the middle, it means that attack has the potential to be able to take over, your email. So what do? You can enforce that anybody that has not moved away from version this by this, they should not be able to read their emails, or maybe you should prompt them for another login. So you can leverage, MFA with conditional access policy for devices. And that way, that's how you prevent device attack and monitor device registration and every other thing that needs to happen on a device. I've talked about how we can monitor MFA using policy. So there are lots of reports, different types of reports that can tell you who logged in, what challenge method they used, were they unable to log in. So if somebody says, I'm having issue logging in, you can go and see what the challenge is at what MFA level. There's lots of insights that can help you manage MFA for a user. Now we have 4 types of authentication method. Bad password is bad password. Password 123, password. So Microsoft Entra has the ability to be able to allow you configure password complexity, right? You can say anybody that is creating password that is categorized like this, you should not even allow it. So I can come now to set a password, and if I use a password like password or quit, these are common words, right, that exist in the password dictionary. Microsoft Entra has the ability to say no, block it, and then say that no, that we can use 1 minute, please. I need to sort out someone at the door. I'm back. So we can configure Entra to be able to say these passwords, if they're in any of this category, allow or don't allow. Like we all know, lots of organizations, or rather Microsoft is pushing for passwordless. And so that's why almost every Windows device you buy now, passwordless is always what is prompted to set up. This is just explaining how your authentication method strength aligns with security. So if you're in the quadrant of passwordless, it means that you have high security, and it's also convenient, because passwordless means that I don't need to know anything. I don't need to know any password. If I come and use my fingerprint, if I use my eye, my system will open, my app will open. I don't need to remember anything. So it's convenient, and it's been seen to have high security. When you have password with 2-factor authentication, high security, but can be a bit inconvenient. Why? Because people don't like to carry an extra device. How many of you, have gone to increase your banking limit just because there's a limit that you're in? I'm to ask you for a token before that transaction. I won't lie to you, I do it all the time. I hit a particular threshold and I go and increase my limit again, because I don't want to always remember to go with my token, because I'm very careless with things, little things that I hold, right? So it can be inconvenient, but it's high security. 2-factor authentication, high security, but it can be. And so right now, the Microsoft is forcing all admins to use a YubiKey as the standard and best practice for accessing Azure. You can imagine, as an Entra admin, you need a YubiKey. So someone like me, I need to now find a way. Maybe I'll buy a rope and putting it on my neck, right? Just so that I don't forget it or lose it, right? And then when you just have only passwords, it's convenient, right? People just want to know only one thing, but very low security. Again, in the last class on SSO, we saw how just using passwords alone expose us. I'll run through this. There's not too much. This is just talking about FIDO key. It's a security key that you can use for multi-factor authentication. You see it a lot. Lots of organizations are adopting it for admins, highly privileged users, and you see it a lot in security agencies, right? It allows you to use security keys for your admins rather than the authenticator app, which, like we know, MFA flooding can still happen because it's on your device. So you know what MFA flooding is. You get multiple prompts, and because you think you're frustrated, you just say okay. Meanwhile, you just authorize somebody access into your system. So I'll just make. We also know one way of managing security. You can disable an account. Yeah. Microsoft allows you to disable accounts and revoke user sessions. So beyond that, somebody has left the organization, you could see high user risky sign, and the action could be block, the action could be disable. We could do audits of identities and we can't get anybody to explain what these identities are, right? So what do? We disable them. We might not delete, we might just disable them and say until we're able to understand what these identities are, right? And then revoke their user sessions just so that whoever has access to them loses their access. And if the real person who needs to have access to it comes, then the person can request for the account to be reset and the devices to be resynced, right? So that's a cool security function, the ability to be able to disable. And for all of those who in this program did not like PowerShell, again, you can use PowerShell to achieve these configurations. You're just lucky that this falls under the pro bono topics. If not, I'm giving you assignments to use PowerShell again. So how do you deploy and manage, password protection, right? For on-prem environments, like your domain controller should never have access to the internet. Then somebody is going to say, how come Microsoft Entra is a cloud service and it has access to the internet? Oh yes, that's why you've been taught about how to set up your tenants. But if you're setting up your Microsoft domain controller, which you set up yourself, Microsoft didn't set it up for you, we recommend for it not to have any access to the internet. And then using the Microsoft Entra password protection, right? You can connect to what we call the banned password list. So there's a central password list that you can query that can tell you if your password has compromised. I don't know if any of you have used the is it have I been pawned? If you go to that website, I'll look for it and drop it, in the description. You can go there and you can put your password and it can tell you if your password is classified as a compromised password. In fact, Google Manager, Microsoft Password Manager, Google Password Manager, all feed into that. So if you're someone that saves your password on your browser, when it says, you can go to your Google Password Manager and say check, right? And if you check, it will tell you which of your saved passwords, right, have been compromised. So I told you how when I looked, I saw some of my passwords and I just checked. One of them is my VPN. Well, it's not even my VPN, it's a friend's VPN. We are doing like shared bed things. So apparently the password that we used to set up that VPN is showing that one is showing red compromised. So we need to I will alert my friend to change it, So you can use that platform to check, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't compromised from you. It could just be that somebody else has that password and it's been compromised and it's in the database. So as long as it's classified as a compromised password, meaning that a password that has gone into the dark web and is being shared as possible passwords, you don't want to use that kind of password. So you can set up your environment to do those checks, whereas your staffs are setting up passwords, it can check it. Or when they have set up password, periodically can go and check and come back and tell you that you have people using passwords that are classified as this, that, and then based on that action this. So we're not going to go into how to set it up because that's a bit of outside our scope. Another thing we can do here is smart lockout thresholds, right? So for those who are used to managing on-prem environment, we used to call it I'm going old. There's something we used to call it password. There's something we used to call it where it's just the ability to say that if someone has tried their password a couple of times, right, and by the next try, you should, block it, right? You should lock out the account because ideally, think about it. I think it's 5 times should be fair enough, right? If you know your password. So some organizations, I think even by regulation, there are some regulations that say 3, some say 5, and some, I think Microsoft's default is 10, right? So meaning that if I've tried my password 10 times and it failed, by the 11th time you should block me, means that I'm not the one, because if hackers are trying to guess your password, the tool that they use has the ability to try it multiple times. So we believe that if you fail 10, block the account, don't give it room to be tried again. And so smart lock is always on for all users, right? It's just that you can customize the default configuration. So if your organization says they don't want 10, they want at 3, 5, then you can do that, maybe based on whatever regulation, checks your organization. Again, I'll quick run this, but we also have what we call certificate-based authentication. I've worked in an organization where before you gain access to our network, right, there has to be a certificate that is existing on your device. So the reason is that people can just walk into that organization. Maybe you invite your friend to come over and pick up something, and you think your friend is your friend, and your friend is trying to do social engineering and just say, guy, can I get internet? Take your network cable, plug into their laptop. Meanwhile, their laptop has a what's that? net card that can scan, right? And their network, their laptops, your friend is gisting with you, but they've turned up the network scan that's already scanning the network, right? So that's why you put network access controls, right? And network access controls will typically use certificate authentication, which means that if the certificate is not in the store of that device, then it will not even grant it. So some applications also use certificate-based authentication for user login just to validate. I think back in the days, I don't know what's now because I haven't played in the Western Union and MoneyGram space, but back in the days, one of the things that they used to secure their connections to their server was certificate and MoneyGram. So then in the financial industry, you cannot do a Western Union transaction or MoneyGram transaction if their certificate was not on your system, right? So that's another way of validating of putting identity security. I think it was in the third class when we looked at roles. We looked at Azure roles and then we looked at Entra roles, right? So it's the same thing. You can set up identities such that they can be used to log into VM. So the guys in the cloud security, right, who learned how to set up virtual machines, you can set up the virtual machine and it will create local accounts. Now, Entra also allows you to be able to say that people can use their identities you have created on Entra to log into virtual machines, which will almost give you the same simulation when we were on-prem. So back on-prem, if you set up a VM, you can join it to the domain, and then when you join to the domain, people can use their, domain accounts to log in and manage those servers. So imagine the people with enterprise roles, right? So you can create admins with enterprise roles and then add those admins to be able to access add those roles to resource groups that allow them to be able to log in with that enterprise account into those virtual machines. So you can do that even in Entra. So let's look at planning conditional access policy. Now, before we go into this, what Microsoft calls security default. Again, if you're just using the baseline Microsoft Entra, I recommend that you turn this setting on. It's called Microsoft security default, right? Turn it on because it provides you like a mini security at your tenant, right? But if you are an enterprise user, you have premium, Microsoft Premium, Microsoft E3, E5, you don't need to turn this on because then you can use conditional access policy. So the security default comes with a conditional access policy, but it's just baseline security. So the conditional access policy that is in security default is that everybody must use MFA, something like that. Yeah. But if you have an enterprise license, then you can play around what the MFA is for, right? Or rather, you play around the scenarios for MFA. So what we're saying here in essence is that if you have a tenant that you just turn on today, go and turn on security default so that it then forces people to use their MFA. So looking at this, flow, what's conditional access policy? So you have users in locations, you have applications, you have devices, right? And all of these things are sending signals, authentication signals, right, into your tenant. So you want to verify every access attempt. You want to either allow or block. And so at that point, you're going to say, for every action, this require MFA to determine whether you can allow or block. Um, MFA has been very useful in managing risk. For me, MFA is very big on managing risks for me. And yes, compliance and regulatory. So if regulatory says that people who are here should not be able to do ABCD, then conditional access policy can allow you, go that granular to meet those kind of requirements. So you will have the user who should be impacted with the policy. You will have the target resource that you're saying that if this user is trying to access, then you have what the condition is: block, allow. Then you have what controls you want to put in place. And then you can also manage conditional policy with sessions. You can say sessions to timeout. If the person has logged in for 2 hours, timeout. You can use it to do session timeouts, right? And also you can use conditional access policy to manage risk level, meaning that I think I've explained that to where if somebody's account has been classified as medium risk, right, action this. If the account is classified as high risk, action this. And if it's low risk, do this. So conditional access policy allows you play around all of that. Um, So this is talking about how access token is issued, right? So when a user logs in, right, an access token request is initiated, and then the user is either assigned or no assignment, right? If the user is assigned, yes, then conditional access policies in scope of that request. Conditional access policy is triggered for the scope of that request. If no, then access token is issued. You can control access again through block, through conditions that are satisfied, not to overflow this flow. But what it's saying is that you can use conditional access policy at every point of the access token use. So you can say, okay, if this person matches all these conditions, grant access, person has the token. Now you can come back and say, but if this person has logged in more than 2 hours, time out the session, and then let the person re-log in again to issue another token. So you can use conditional access policy to manage token issuance through a flow of a user. How do you set up conditional access policy? Again, enter, you go to conditional access policy and you will see where to create policy and put whatever matching decisions. I always recommend, I'm big on saying, leave configuration, do your design. Ask yourself, what do I want to achieve? What do I want to block? Who do I not want access to? Who do I want to access to? Is it best to assign it to a user or best to assign it to a group? Is it best to assign it to what time? And then you can do a test. Can I test this on one user, and then when the behavior is okay, then I can get approval to roll it out. So you can do block grants, not require. I've talked about all of this session access control. You can do that. And you can also use template-based conditional access policy. So Microsoft has 14 templates already currently available. So as security is evolving, Microsoft itself too is creating some of these policies down. And as an organization, you can duplicate them and use those policies to enforce security in your environment. So some typical scenarios would be you want to require registration from a trusted location. Again, somebody is giving a device for the first time. You want to make sure that they register that device and MFA is prompted, as long as it is from a trusted location. So that way, you know that, okay, somebody's device was not stolen. I could be given a laptop and on my way home, I get robbed, right? And then somebody is trying to log into the device. So you could put conditional access policy that is only from a trusted location and things like that. You can block access per location. Like I said, for some type of businesses, certain countries and certain regions are classified as high risk. And so you want to use condition because you can't know. Your users will tell you, oh yes, meanwhile, an emergency can happen and somebody needs to travel to a country. And it's not that their self is high risk, but their country, maybe by virtue of what's happening in their country, at that point, it's classified as high risk. And so because of what's happening at their country at that time, even though they have gone to their country and they think they can work from there, and even though their company has a work from home policy, right, the system would have to trigger and alert us that this is happening for the safety of the organization. I've talked about how we require compliance devices too. So mobile devices, sometimes you find out that I can't use my email on my device, it's possible. And then by the time you call service desk, they say, oh, you're using an outdated, OS upgrade. You can also use conditional access policy to force terms of service. How many of you, say the truth, really read? You don't download an app. How many of you really read those terms of use? You don't read it. But guess what? For organizations, we can force people to, even if they don't read, make sure that they scroll all the way down. So you know how people just do next, 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 next. Then tomorrow they say, oh, this device is monitoring me. This device is listening to everything I'm saying. And I'll be like, didn't you read what the device said? One example is if you're in Nigeria, I don't know about other countries, but many of you know lots of the microfinance loan bank apps, right? You just there, you get a random call somewhere that tells you that so person has taken a loan and put you as next of kin. I don't know if any of you have had that scenario twice, and I was so furious at this family member. Why would they use me as next of kin without my consent? Apparently, they did not. Those loan apps, what it does is that when they're downloading it so that they can take the loan app tells them that it's going to export in their contact details. Are you seeing it? And because they at that moment they're desperate, they say yes. So it exports all their contact details into their own database. So when you default in paying for that loan, you know that most times you save your family people with things that you save your spouse with a name that shows as your spouse, you save you save something. So that's where they do their own, recovery social engineering. So they look through your contacts and they're like, okay, this person says this person has big brother, or this person has cousin, so person, and then they'll just call you and say so the person never used you, but because they've exported all your contacts into this person's details, into their database, they can come and call any of your family member that way, because they believe that when they call you out, you force your family member to come and pay their money, but you can't be angry at the loan app people because they put it in their terms of service, and you just did click, 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 click. So as an organization, because you want people to read their terms of service, you can use conditional access policy that says the person must read. So when the person gets to terms of service, the button for next will not be active. So they will have to click read. And it's okay if they don't read it, but they'll click read and they will scroll down and then they will now accept. So for us, in corporate environment, what that does is that it means that you are intentionally telling us that you didn't read. Versus if you're doing click, 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 you can say, oh, I didn't know my system was hanging. And so by the time I was clicking it, it can't happen this one, because if you don't click read and then scroll down, it's never going to allow you pass. So that's another way we use conditional access policy under terms of use. Okay. So we never recommend, if you are doing a block action, put all users, all apps. Now you can shut down the environment. Never use all users. So it's either use a group that has test users, or use a user, one single user, until you are done testing her. So never use because if you're doing the setup, you see the all users, all apps. Never use that. All users, all apps, all platform. Please, you could lock out yourself. You could lock out the organization with that. Conditional access policy works with Defender for Cloud. So when we are in the data class, one of our thing is the first one will be data. I think it's the second class of data. We'll be looking at Defender for Cloud apps, and in there again we'll see where conditional access policy helps us to do, where you can prevent people from. So these cloud apps that we have integrated into SSO, right? Do you know we can use conditional access policy embedded with Defender for Cloud to prevent you being able to copy and download, right? So even though it's your mobile device, even though it's a mobile app, we can still restrict you from downloading, from print screening, and all of those things, using conditional access policy. So the condition will be, if this is a personal device, then the Defender for Cloud apps will say, don't do this, don't do that. Again, sign-in frequency and multi-factor authentication cannot be overemphasized, right? I talked about in the SSO class how you can hijack people's session, right? So it's very important you understand session and the frequency. Again, the hacker tools, the frequency at which they try multiple passwords is already a trigger that can be used. So if a password is tried XYZ time between this, then you want to take an action of maybe prompting for MFA just to validate. I'm just seeing this one here. Maybe it is there. Maybe because I don't really do lots of conditional access policy, because like I said, in big organizations, right? So many of the IAM rules are separated, right? But if you're working with small firms, and you have to do some of these things, then you might be one person doing everything. This is a cool tool. I haven't seen this. This talks about you use the validation, so you can simulate what that your conditional access policy is and whether it will match what you want it to do. Very good one here. Okay, I'm skipping all of this so we can buy time. There's another thing we call the identity protection, right? On Entra, identity protection is a service that will allow you to view your security posture, right? So you can say, I want to investigate the risk that in using XYZ data in Microsoft Entra. And you can also say, I want to export this risk detection to maybe a third-party syslog, maybe for SOC. See, maybe SOC prefers to use a particular kind of application to manage, alerts and threats and triggers. And so you want to export. You want to also automate detection and remediation. It's not everything you want somebody to manually go in as a SOC analyst. So You can be a SOC analyst with so many experience from Entra, where you understand how to interpret Entra logs and triggers and responses, and how to configure automatic detection and remediation of this identity-based risk. So some of the risks that can be detected and remediated in Entra, things like anonymous IP address. Again, you can have a policy that says once somebody is logging with an IP that is anonymous, so you know that people can max out their IP so that it doesn't show their actual IP, right? Especially when they're using VPNs, right? You can have a policy in your organization. Now, depending on what, remember, everything is based on the risk of your organization. You can say that if people are signing in with anonymous IP, then automatically allow or don't bother or block or whatever, and you can put what the detection, trigger, and investigation is, right? Again, IP addresses are linked to organizations, linked to brands. So there are certain IP addresses that have been blacklisted because they are known to do spamming, they're known to be used by hackers. You can again have those, say any IP address that is on the blacklist, and that's the blacklist IP address, right, or linked to a malware, you can say automatically block, right? So you don't need to bother trying to say allow and then so that you can go and investigate. You say block, yeah, lead credentials. So in the password managed password database, right? Like I said, if you find that a password that a staff is using is in the lead credentials, again, you can trigger. So all of these are risk that you don't necessarily have to start. You trigger them, then you create a ticket for them and leave it open for someone to. You can trigger action close, right? And so you can go back to report and say these are the number of these that happened, but it would trigger an action which could be block, which could be deny the person, which could be wipe the person's device, and all of that, just so that there's a remediation. So we have three types of reports that vary. We have the risky users, risky signing, and risky detections. And then you get them in either low, medium, or high. That's how Microsoft interprets them. The identity protection is a paid service. Yeah. Customers don't really like to hear this because when they see all the cool things you can do, they wish it was just bundled. So you get the full benefit of this if you're on the Entra ID Premium. Most people who are on the enterprise one, which is E3, E5, and I think Premium for Business Premium, they have this function. It's not a function that is just enabled by default. So this talks about the the 4 important roles that have access to the identity protection. So the global admin, like the global admin is the Lord and Savior of Entra. And then you have your security admin, then you have your security operator and security reader. By now, if you haven't done our class on privilege identity management, I recommend you go and watch that YouTube video, because what it will do for you, it will help you understand how to assign roles and permissions to people so that they do only what they're allowed to do. So the user risky policy, right? This talks about, so both sign-in risk policy and user risk policy can be enabled to automate the response to risk detections and allow users to self-remediate. Again, you can say that if this thing triggers and I am medium, right, prompt me to resign in with MFA. So that way, the moment I resign in with MFA, it remediates and proves that I'm the right person. So you don't necessarily again have to start worrying about raising a ticket and investigating. Once the person has signed in with MFA, then we kind of go to bed, right? And again, like I said, you can even do wipe device. So what is the MFA registration policy? In order for us to verify who you are, which is more than just your username and password, right? We already talked about the value of MFA, but we must have a policy that says that users must be registered, right? So this is a configuration that you need to set on your tenant. Yep. So you go to your identity protection and then you see MFA authentication registration policy and you would set it. Now, this is for the identity protection. There's the MFA that we had listened to before that is turned on at your tenant that talks about enforced, enabled, and disabled, right? But when you turn on identity protection, remember, identity protection is looking at user risky signing risky, those kind of risk detections. Like we said, you want to react, you want to remediate them using some conditional access policy and MFA reaction. So you need to, on identity protection, configure again MFA. This is typically how risk reports will be, right? Sorry, this is blurred, but it's a cool reporting thing. It just shows you so many. You can see somebody's signing. I will check. I don't know if I have it turned on in my tenant, because it's not a feature that Microsoft just gives us in free tenant. Most times, if a customer wants it, then they set up a tenant, set up demo. They always like to do like POC with your environment so that you see koro with your eye what's happening in your environment. I don't think it's turned on, but I can check. So it just gives you that whole insight and visibility, which of your users are showing as risky, which of your users already have user risk signing. And again, like I said, you can remediate, self-remediation. They've even added, so I don't know if you're on this call, if you know that Microsoft has its own threat detection AI tool called Copilot for security. So we have the Microsoft 365 Copilot, which is for productivity tool, and you know that there's a work stream that was learning that. But from a security perspective, we have a tool called Copilot for security. People are building skill set there, like that's a skill set on its own, right? Copilot for security, especially if you are building a career in security operations. If you want to be a SOC, security operations, and you have capacity, you want to infuse AI, I recommend you go and learn how to use Copilot for security. And Microsoft is infusing it in so many places, in conditional access policy. Now they have put it in the risky users. Organizations that are maybe SOC driven, managed services organizations that are doing managed services for people and using Sentinel and Entra and SOC, they would like this skill because now they are bundling Copilot for security into it. And if you know how to use it to automate response and trigger, that's a good skill set that is in demand now. Now, we've been talking about identity all the way, and most times we always focus on human identity. Remember, I think it was in our week 2, we talked about non-human identities, and Microsoft will call them workload identities. They're not really for human beings, but these identities have access, they have privileges, and so you also want to monitor them, right? And make sure that the security of them. Now, these workloads cannot do MFA because they are not human, right? So, but you want to put some controls. For example, if some of them have credential secrets, you want to control how their credential secrets are stored, where it is stored, who has access to it, right? And workload identity risk too can be detected as suspicious signing, account compromise, unusual addition of credentials to an OAuth app. So if you have an app that has been registered and then they are noticing unusual, addition of credentials to that app, then you want to do those kind of triggers. So they are not human and non-human identities. In Microsoft's Entra is called workload identities. Just understand it like that. Now we also have the Microsoft Defender for identity. Again, another powerful tool. Again, another powerful skill set. People who set it up are in demand. Back in the days, we used to call it we go in the cloud has made me I've forgotten a lot of our on-prem. It used to be called Active Directory. There's something it used to be called because we used to put it on-prem, put it in the Active Directory on-prem, and then it would tell us all the triggers and alerts. So now Microsoft has moved it to Microsoft Defender for Identity. And so what it does is that every login that is happening in your on-prem can feed into your Defender for Identity, right? And that your Defender identity can talk to Entra. I'm sorry, can't talk to the cloud, and then you can see everything that is happening to those your on-prem, right? On-prem identity. So these whole wonderful features that we've talked about from a security alert and monitoring perspective can still be leveraged. And then we can look at things like honeycomb accounts. So you can set up honeycomb account. What are honeycomb accounts? We can create an account that is not a real user, right? But we put that account in the system. We give that account privilege. It's not a real user, and we leave it in the system, and we see what the account can do. So what that tells you is that someone has compromised, because when people compromise you, what they do is that they go and look for accounts that have high privilege. So you use your honeycomb accounts to help you become aware, because as a normal user, if my account is compromised, because I'm a normal user, I can be doing my normal legit work, and somebody has compromised my account and is doing so, then it'll be hard for the business. But a honeycomb account is not supposed to do anything but have high privilege. So what will happen is that if for any reason the account has been compromised and starts to do stuff, because on the identity we can configure this account as a honeycomb. When we start seeing it, for example, see it log into this, then automatically means that somebody is already playing funny on our network, because that account though has privilege but should not be able to do anything because it's not owned by any human being. We just created it as a dummy account. Okay. Uh, Again, I think we talked about this briefly when we looked at rules, rule based on that PIN. Again, like I said, if you're in Azure space, if you're in the guys in the cloud computing, we identity management manages their access. But the way they set up their environment is also unique. You have resource groups, you have workloads, and so you have to do the access control on the IAM of those workloads, right? So that's where this Azure rules fall. And you can also create custom rules. Remember, we talked about custom rules in Entra, where we say the role has 10 functions, but the people in the department actually need only 5. Why are we giving them 10? Because they are called application admin. No, we will now custom that role. Take out that 5. That is the only thing that they need to do, and create it for them. Right. So many people, even when they have enabled privilege identity management, they just carry roles, verbal, verbal. Nobody wants to sit down and understand what you people do in your department. Do you need it? Because the truth is, if as an admin I'm given a role I don't need and a privilege I don't need, when I'm compromised, I won't know because I don't use it. I don't use it. So that's why we preach zero trust. So it's best to give only what I use, so that when I'm feeling that this my account is acting somehow, it's because I'm using the account. But if I don't use, maybe my account can do ABCD, but can also copy BitLog code. And I really, in my role, I don't have any need to copy BitLog. Maybe the team that copies BitLog code, they are there too. But my team doesn't have. When somebody is using my account to copy BitLog code, I will not, because I don't know. But if you custom roles and say, this is what 5, 6, 7 things you're supposed to do, then this other team is supposed to do the remaining 4, create custom rules separate like that, then people would will be able to manage security better. Again, so the way we said workload identities when we're looking at users, and we call them non-human accounts, right? It's the same thing under the whole resource group. We have what we call managed identities. So these are identities that in the on-prem environment we used to call them service accounts, right? The accounts that should be able to, their system assigned. Some of them are user assigned, but they are not user assigned that is a human being, right? They are assigned user functions so that they can do user activities. So you have maybe test accounts, you have maybe connector accounts for the guys in Power Platform and all of those things that need to sign in like a user to be able to run that script, right? We call them managed identity. So this is a typical scenario. You have an application that needs to access outside resources like a database or storage account, right? So the question will be, how can a developer do this securely? And you don't want to embed an account and password in the application. So I think it was in second class where I talked about the Uber compromise that happened, where social engineering, they got access to this privileged user, and they got a PowerShell script that had embedded in it the account and password. So there are some applications, right, that need to run queries. We had this lots in the financial industry. You see them a lot, right? And lots of developers do it. So that account needs to run maybe a periodic task schedule or something. And so for it to run, it needs a privileged username and password. Many times you see the developers embed it in the web config and they don't encrypt it, right? So it's in clear text. So on Azure now, we can use what we call managed identity, where you will create that account. From the moment you're setting up that account, you're not creating it like a user, you're creating it as a managed identity, because it will ask you where is it supposed to use this identity. You will now say this virtual machine, this. So any other place, that account will not be able to work. It will only work within those managed identity, and you can give it the role. Again, you can custom the roles, you can select what roles it's supposed to do, and you can see here that when you are creating, role, you can say assign this role now to a managed identity. This is under Azure roles and not the Entra role that we were doing. Key vaults. When we're talking about enterprise, so if you go and watch our last video, we're talking about how to set up enterprise application and application registration. We talked about for OIDC type of SSO, you have to create secret keys, right? And most typical way people save secret keys is save it on a notepad, save it on their system. That's fine. What you need to do is you need to set up an Azure key vault, right? If your organization does not have an enterprise key management system, set up the Azure Key Vault. Azure Key Vault will grant who needs access, right? You can put access policy, who needs access, and you can even go granular and say who can manage it, who can approve it, so that you don't keep those policies, right? You don't keep those keys, right, in your local notepad. And then you can also configure a role-based access control, meaning that people can only access it based on a role, and maybe the role can be a eligible time base. So meaning that it's not a permanent. So meaning that if I need to access the Azure Key Vault, then I'll go to my PIM, then I'll look for that role, then I'll request for activation. Probably even add, you can even add maybe on top of it approval. You go to my manager. So that means that anytime somebody needs to go to the vault, the person cannot just on their own. You probably will need to go through, a privileged role, which is one, then also go through an approval. So depending on what your organization is, you can create that kind of granular function. Again, the key vault has its own rules that you can use to determine. So you can have auditors that are just reviewing the rules. You can have people that are administering the secrets and using it. And you can have those who are just reading it. Again, you need to understand the sensitivity of these roles. Typically how you retrieve key vaults would be, you log in, you hide, you add the secret key. You can use UI method, you can use scripting. Again, many of you don't like script, but you can use the GUI and you can use scripting to extract a key and to I like this topic, so I'm going to look for an assignment and give here. I know many people will watch this video will be overwhelmed, but even if it's after the program, I'm going to create an assignment for Azure Key Vault, because like I said, many people are doing SSO and many people have not invested in an enterprise Key Vault system. So this is one activity that, for example, if you develop a pocket-sized book or a run book on how to set up an Azure Key Vault, rule-based access control, end-to-end, blueprint, a massive get, imagine publishing this on your LinkedIn as an article, and all that. You're going to get lots of visibility and reads, because it's something that lots of people are in need of and don't know that they can turn up just because they have Azure. Okay, and the last we won't dwell more on this because this is more network, right? This is purely network, talking about private access, internet access. So, as we're moving away from, as we gradually move away from on-prem environments into cloud, right? You know how when you were on-prem, your organization can restrict heaven and earth. You can't even barely do anything. Now we can begin to do it in the cloud, where we can restrict what your system can do, restrict the website you can go to, restrict what system you can talk to, restrict the type of apps you can use, restrict what you do on the internet. As long as it's company laptop, we can say you cannot go to, I remember those days in the early banking days, when, tellers and those tellers and the guys in cash and all that, they always are eating, they come very early because, they need to open the vault, count, set their tea ready before they now open the banking hall by 8. And this is in Nigeria, for those who are not in Nigeria. So when they come in like that, we in IT who come in, or we also come in early, because in IT, you want to make sure that the systems are up and ready before they open to the banks, right? Now, the guys in the core banking would have probably run end of day or end of month, and want to just make sure that everything is ready before 8 o'clock when the banking hall will open. Now, when we come, because we're IT, we used to have the internet open, and the internet, the speed used to be because less people are in the industry. So those guys who come, the teller guys and all that, when they come like that, they start to download movies. They, they start to do so many things. So it used to upset us because the internet, because we have maybe we have patch to download, we have one application to download, we have targeted that, we do it in the morning or in the evening, and then we come and the internet is now slow in the morning, and we're like, what is it? And then when I find out that it's these guys watching movie, like you see somebody confirm movie, the person is streaming, and this was way back when internet bandwidth was not even as as fair as it is now. A bank is struggling with how many megabytes and they are consuming it, So now you can do all of this. So what do? We just come up with a policy and block, like, unless you're in IT, you cannot use, first of all, we put a quality of service, you can't use this amount of bandwidth. And then unless you're in IT, before you can do downloads and this, right? So now that we're moving to the cloud, remember the cloud is internet, meaning that I cannot talk to any of my resources. I am on the internet. So by default, people have access to the internet. But you want to make sure that if they're on company laptop, they are not doing any NYT. So you can say if they're company laptop, they cannot use their WhatsApp web. If they're company laptop, they cannot go to the blogs. So it forces them that on work laptop is only work that they can do. And so if that person needs to faff or do anything that is not work related, they'll be doing outside. So that way you restrict and still bring that private access and internet access. So that's what this is talking about. On that note, I'm going to say thank you very much for joining us on this textilers journey. Trust me, it's been a wonderful experience working with all of you. I want to again say a very big thank you. I just decided to do this extra class just to explain, all the um, additional things that form up identity security. I'm available, reach out to me. I know that this is a skill set that no matter how it looks like as if tech is saturated, is still in demand because people must have identities, people must log into identity. So the more you practice, the more you understand and master it. And there are lots of areas that identity is relevant that people are not yet harnessing. Like again, like I said, you don't necessarily need to go into the big companies. There are lots of small companies today. At least I know people that have hotels that are using Microsoft, a lot of people that have supermarkets that are using Microsoft, and you can build this whole identity framework for them, and help them to be able to see the importance of this identity security, especially now that the Nigerian Data Protection Act for those in Nigeria, is becoming a big thing. And then you can imagine in Africa, as everybody is scaling and plugging themselves into the use of the internet, it's very important that you show them how to manage their identity using an identity framework. So until I come your way again next time, thank you very much. I look forward to us having the data class, because trust me, you're going to be like, I took you from here to here. It's a switch, but it's going to be very interesting. And have a wonderful weekend. Bye bye, everybody.